All right, in business news, some jet fuel suppliers at OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg are still not able to guarantee supplies to their customers. That's caused reportedly some international airlines to divert flights to Durban, even to Windhoek, to refuel. Fuel supplies, of course, have been disrupted due to the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal. To discuss, we're joined by aviation expert Desmond Latham. Mr. Latham, thank you for being with us. How bad is the situation right now, as far as you know?
Well, I mean, planes are flying, and it's not as bad as some people are reporting, but there have been problems. And there have been a number of issues involved with delivering fuel to OR Tambo in particular, which is systemic, and it comes partly from the effects of the flooding and also partly from a failure to plan effectively. And thirdly, because of aviation recovering rapidly from post-pandemic. So all of those things, it's kind of like a perfect storm, if you like. It's caught out both private sector, suppliers, and government.
So there are more flights than expected. That would be the good news, the recovery.
Yes, what's happened is that around the world, there's been a complete change in how jet fuel is purchased. A lot of the airlines hedge. In other words, they buy thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of liters of this product over a year or two. And so you can imagine them as operators and as suppliers, we're talking about vast sums of money. So when you don't want to hold stock, for example, so some of the private owners don't want to hold a lot of stock, and so they're buying based on delivery, and then the number of flights increases, and it's happening weekly almost. So you can see that with the production element here, you don't just switch a button and produce jet fuel, for example, or avgas, which are the two main forms of aviation fuel. So yes, it's an advantage, but also what has happened is that around the world, there's been a change in how fuel has moved, and that's also had an impact on us here.
All right, so we can't blame only the disruptions to the Durban port, but it does highlight just how important that port is, how protected it should be from disruptions, and this isn't the first one that we've seen in the last 2 years.
Now, what's happened as well is that the pipeline, you know about the major pipeline that feeds Gauteng from Durban, which was built 10 years ago and has really made a big difference. But the reality about jet fuel, for example, and avgas is it comes by tanker, it comes by train, most of the products, and we've had big problems with Transnet and delivery there. And secondly, it's quite a technical process, so I won't bore you with the details, but the fuel comes through L Road in Johannesburg. It is a strategic process, so we can't say too much about it, other than to say that the change in delivery from pipeline into tanker and has had an effect on that. Secondly, it's caught out some of the suppliers, the private suppliers. But it's not as bad as people are saying. I mean, flights are flying. What we're worried about is that we're talking about contingency plans. And in aviation, everything is about redundancy and contingency for safety and other reasons. So we're starting to wonder, and the aviators, for example, are wondering, why was there no planning for this? You can't just say it was the floods, and you can't just say it's demand. What about contingency plans? So AXA does have some answers here, and government needs to provide answers, as well as some of the private operators who, as I said, have been squeezed a bit.
Yeah, apparently some operators have fuel, some don't, some of the suppliers rather. So now Lufthansa and Turkish Airlines had to fly to other airports, mainly Durban, and Fin24 last week reporting that United Airlines was cutting some flights because it was worried about fuel. What sort of impact does that have? I mean, do the airlines understand that the situation on the ground at OR Tambo is temporary? At least it won't affect their long-term planning, or does this cause them to question?
Well, they will be questioning some of the contingency plans, but they're not as blunt as to say it's all government's fault, or it's all one person's fault, the transport minister, whatever. It's much more complex than that. There's a lot of grey areas in this. So, I mean, some of the airlines, British Airways, Air France, KLM, Delta, Emirates, Qatar, well, Emirates had some issues, but Qatar, Ethiopian, these airlines handled it quite well because they had plans, they had contingency plans. You have logistics people who run the fuel side, and these people are not fools. They can recognize that a problem is occurring. They keep close tabs on supply. They keep close tabs on things like floods. That was a once-in-a-century event in Durban, or perhaps even longer. And so they made their plans. They knew there was going to be an impact on fuel. Others, such as Swiss Air, Lufthansa, they were caught out of it. And so their own contingency planning, their logistics officers, if you like, need to answer some questions. I must be quite blunt about that. United Airlines, on the 25th of last month, just cancelled the flight. So they're one of the few that just blankly cancelled an international direct flight from OR Tambo. And they just didn't appear to even try and deal with that at that stage. So you can see each of these customers has their own way of dealing with this. Yeah. But the flights are flying. British Airways flies 2 a day, for example, and they are flying 2 a day at the moment. So they are getting in and out of OR Tambo. So, I mean, other operators have, I think, fallen short in their planning.
All right. Well, thank you for that holistic picture. Finally, I've got time for a quick question. We haven't spoken about prices of jet fuel. We know fuel affected by the war in Ukraine. Impact on aviation at the moment?
Well, we have a double whammy here because we pay for fuel in dollars and the rand is weak against the dollar, firstly. Secondly, the price of fuel a year ago was less than $80 a barrel. It's over 110 now. So you put those two things together and the local operators are feeling the pinch, to put it mildly. So the fact that Fly Safair went on a big drive yesterday for sales is quite interesting, as you can imagine. But the point being that it has all of the costs around the world. We all globalize, especially aviation. We're part of a massive industry around the entire earth. And when the price of fuel goes up, and oil goes up in particular, you know, our refinery here is being shut down at the moment. We're going to go to import most of our products for various reasons. And that's a strategic issue that I think, my personal opinion, I think needs to be dealt with. So we are going to be buffeted more by this, yes.
All right. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll chat in future. That was aviation expert Desmond Latham.